Hey everyone, before we dive into this gripping tale, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more exciting content like this. They named my creation Seraphim. The title felt a touch extravagant for my liking, but the marketing team was adamant. They claimed it suggested safeguarding, vigilance, an unyielding protector, keeping watch over the schemers at Valerius and Company. It was a compelling narrative, just not the real one. My office, perched on the 38th floor, was a pristine, minimalist cube, exactly as I preferred. It gazed out over the city's disorder, a chaotic, flawed machine I had no interest in repairing. My domain existed within the glow of my monitor. Code streamed like verses of a sonnet, the refined structure of a sealed system, flawless and certain. Seraphim was my magnum opus, more than a mere compliance tool. It was a testament to a core belief. That belief was straightforward. Every action triggers an equal and opposite consequence. For years, I'd observed men in costly suits treat that fundamental law as a quaint notion. I chose to enshrine it openly. Seraphim was a triumph of precision, an AI-powered pre-trade evaluation engine that slashed compliance friction by 90%. Traders adored it. It was swift, discreet, and approved nearly everything. It gave them a sense of liberty. What they didn't grasp was that Seraphim never forgot. It wasn't a gatekeeper. It was an impeccable, incorruptible chronicler built on a proprietary blockchain ledger I'd patented 3 years earlier. Every transaction, every request, every keystroke was etched into cryptographic permanence, unchangeable and everlasting. Less a guardian angel, more a divine scribe cataloging every misstep for a reckoning the wrongdoers didn't even suspect was approaching. On the corner of my desk sat my personal haven, a partially restored 19th century Swiss music box, its intricate gears and levers laid bare. Next to it rested a set of watchmaker's tools. I found solace in its mechanical exactness. Every component served a purpose. Every motion was a direct, predictable result of another. It was truthful in a way that people, especially those in finance, could never be. It was a system incapable of deception. I was shaping my professional life in its likeness. Then there was Kian Jennings. Kian was less a person and more a caricature from a cliché Wall Street flick. He was the firm's golden child, a role he'd inherited from his father, whose multi-billion-dollar fund was the bank's biggest client. Kian wore suits pricier than my car, yet carried them with the careless ease of someone who'd never paid for his own wardrobe. He strode onto the trading floor not with a professional's focus, but with the strut of a B-list celebrity entering a club. His success was a fabrication, a self-perpetuating legend propped up by the firm's top analysts and a board terrified of his father pulling his funds. He was a living embodiment of nepotism-driven hubris, and my system saw him for what he was, a walking disaster waiting to happen. I first flagged him as a serious risk when he started calling me the rule cop. It was a petty jab, tossed with a smirk to his clique of junior traders as I walked by. They chuckled like jackals. I noted it as a data point. Arrogance levels heightened. A week later, an email landed in my inbox. The subject, compliance critique. Kian had sent it to the entire trading floor. It featured a screenshot of a Seraphim alert on one of his bolder trades. Beneath it, a single line. The machine says no. Time to shut it down and head home. The email was meaningless, meant only to broadcast to his loyalists that the rules were a punchline, and he was the one calling the shots. I saw it for what it was, an unauthorized test of the corporate pecking order. I logged it, propensity for public defiance high. He fancied himself a trailblazer, a game changer. That was his favorite term. He'd toss it into sentences that defied syntax or sense. We need to shake up the compliance sector, he'd declare in meetings, reclining in his chair with the smug air of a visionary. It's about capitalizing on market flux, not getting stuck in outdated systems. He was a geyser of hollow buzzwords. He once called switching the office coffee brand a game changer. What he failed to see was that you can't outrun the truth. You can only dodge it and face the consequences later. The consequences arrived on a Tuesday. I was summoned to the main boardroom on the 40th floor, a glass fortress in the clouds designed to make its occupants feel divine. The CEO, Marcus Thorne, A man whose backbone had long since turned to jelly sat at the head of the table. Kian lounged in his chair, tie-less, the epitome of unearned authority. Evelyn, Marcus began, his tone already dripping with apology. Kian has some issues with Seraphim's recent flag on the Phoenix trade. I glanced at Kian. A $500 million derivatives deal, so intricate and questionably legal it should have triggered every warning in the building. Seraphim had simply done its job, flagging it as intended. Kian didn't meet my eyes. He let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Issues? No, Marcus, I've got a verdict. He waved a hand in my direction. I get it. She's here to dot the I's and cross the T's. It's a nice pastime. He turned to the CEO, his voice oozing disdain. But this is the major leagues. We're racing to win, and she's the corporate equivalent of a speed bump. He leaned forward, lowering his voice for effect. She's useless unless you're driving in reverse. The room fell silent, a pristine moment of corporate spinelessness. Every gaze was on Marcus. Kian had drawn a battle line. His profits versus my regulations. It was never an even match. Get her out of my way, Kian said quietly. Marcus Thorne, head of one of the world's most influential investment banks, gave a faint, almost invisible nod. I didn't react. No anger, no outrage. That would have been wasteful. Instead, I felt an odd calm, a sense of resolution. For months, I'd been analyzing Valerius and Company's operational framework, mapping its weaknesses, its blind spots, its critical failure points. Kian's move was my final data point. He wasn't a glitch in the system. He was a virus the system had chosen to shield. The equation was complete. The problem was no longer an unknown. It was a liability to be addressed. I jotted a single, precise note on my tablet and closed the matter. The meeting ended. So did Kian Jennings' career. He just didn't know it yet. 2 days later, the termination email arrived. It was a masterpiece of corporate vagueness. We value your contributions. Reorganizing for future success. Best wishes in your next chapter. It was the digital version of a generic card and a store-bought cake. I felt no alarm, no emotion at all. This was no shock. It was a foreseen step in a sequence I'd set in motion months ago. I began methodically disconnecting from the network. I archived my project files, erased my personal data, and wiped my browser history. A clean, final digital purge. Then I packed my belongings. The watchmaker's tools went into their leather case, the half-completed music box carefully placed in my briefcase. These were the only things in that office that truly belonged to me. The rest was just clutter. As I logged out of my workstation for the last time, I thought of the server farm in the basement, a humming, blinking metropolis, the physical core of the bank's digital nervous system. My system. What they didn't understand, what Kian never grasped, was that Seraphim was more than software. It was a self-sustaining ecosystem with its own rules of survival. And I'd embedded one hidden feature, a final protocol for a scenario I'd always known was possible. In that cold, shadowed room, a single line of code was running. Revoked _credentials, user ID ES48, employee Shaw Evelyn, terminated. A digital blade. But my ID wasn't just an access pass. It was the third piece of a tripartite cryptographic key. The other 2 pieces sat on secure servers, one in Zurich, one linked to the company's private key. Alone, they were useless, but combined with my termination as the final authenticator, they unlocked something. They opened the vault. I'd built a backdoor into Seraphim, a feature I'd pitched to the board as the Omnibus channel. I'd sold it as a high-speed sandbox for structuring complex, multi-leg global trades before logging them in the main ledger, a trader-friendly tool. I'd called it. They ate up the jargon. Kian, especially, saw it for what he thought it was, a loophole, a clever way to mask his trade's true nature, to slip assets through a gray zone he believed was hidden. He thought he'd found a crack in my flawless system. He was wrong. The Omnibus channel wasn't a sandbox. It was a trap. Every trade he routed through it, every rule skirting, high-stakes bet he thought was his secret, was instantly mirrored to a sealed, encrypted data vault. The moment HR revoked my access, the key was complete, the vault opened, and Seraphim executed its final directive. transmit its entire contents to the regulatory servers at the SEC and FCA. No override, no recall. It was a digital dead man's switch. My professional demise was the trigger for his. That evening, I sat in my study. Bach's cello suites, music of pure, elegant logic, played softly in the background. I brewed a cup of Earl Grey tea. Not for 3 minutes, not for 5, but precisely 4. Accuracy was everything. As I sat, I imagined data packets flowing silently across the globe, a perfect, time-stamped, unalterable record of Kian Jennings' greed and hubris, delivered straight to those who could act on it. My role in the drama was done. I'd written the script, built the stage, and set the final act in motion. All that remained was for the lead to deliver his catastrophic closing lines. I lifted a tiny brass gear with tweezers, holding it to the light. The music box on my desk waited patiently. I had all the time in the world. The chaos I'd unleashed felt distant. All that mattered was the small, perfect system before me and the quiet contentment of a task masterfully completed. I didn't need to be at Valerius to know what came next. I'd built the system, after all. I knew the variables, the players, the inevitable outcome. With me gone, Kian was a king without a leash. The speed bump was removed, just as he demanded. He was free to race as fast as he pleased. He didn't hesitate. Emboldened by his victory, convinced he was invincible, he crafted the boldest, most reckless trade of his career. A billion-dollar deal based on insider information so blatant it was practically glowing. A sure bet, as long as no one was watching. And he believed no one was. He was so proud of his ghost channel, as I later heard he dubbed the Omnibus channel. He'd boasted about it to a junior trader, a naive kid who probably thought Kian was a mastermind. He funneled the entire trade through the trap, certain he was moving in the shadows of my system. He didn't know he was standing in a spotlight, meticulously documenting his own crime in cryptographic clarity. He thought he was outsmarting the gods. In truth, he was signing his own confession again and again. The next morning must have been triumphant for him, at least for a few hours. The trade paid off spectacularly. The screens blazed electric green. The trading floor would have been alive, the air heavy with the scent of profit and bravado. Kian would have held court, the victorious hero, the man who'd capitalized on market flux and shattered outdated systems. I'm sure he used both phrases. Then the elevators opened. Federal regulators stepping onto a trading floor is a chilling spectacle. They don't rush or yell. They move with calm, bureaucratic certainty, far more terrifying than any SWAT team. Sober-faced men and women in practical shoes, carrying briefcases full of subpoenas. The buzz on the floor would have died instantly, silence rippling from the elevator bank. The green on the screens would have turned nauseating. Here's the exquisite detail, the one that brought me a private thrill. They didn't head for the CEO or the legal team. They walked with steady, deliberate purpose through the maze of desks, past the other star traders, straight to Kian Jennings. One held a warrant detailing the illegal trade from the night before, not in vague terms, but with the impossible precision of a system that had watched it unfold in real time. Account numbers, execution times, routing data. Everything. The look on his face when it hit him, that's the moment I cherished. The smug, self-assured grin dissolving, replaced by the dazed bewilderment of a man confronted by a phantom. A man whose entire worldview, where he was the star and rules were for lesser mortals, was crumbling in real time. There's been a mistake, he'd have stammered, babbling about market trends, alpha, synergy, his favorite buzzwords now just empty noise against the stark reality of the warrant. Mr. Jennings, an agent would have said, voice flat and unmoved, please stand up. And just like that, the king was toppled, not with a bang, but with a polite request, the inevitable result of his own actions. My system had performed flawlessly. I wasn't there for the aftermath, but I didn't need to be. I'd written the diagnostic code. I knew what it would reveal. The bank was in disarray. The raid sent shockwaves through the firm. Clients were calling, the board was in crisis mode, and Marcus Thorne was probably cowering under his desk. They had a catastrophe and no clue how it happened. They needed answers, so they called in David Chun, the head of technology, a brilliant engineer who'd always suspected Seraphim was more than it seemed. I can see him now, standing in that glass fortress, facing a massive screen. The mood would have been somber. Marcus Thorne, pale and shaken. The remaining board members, a group of ashen men in tailored suits. "We've audited Seraphim thoroughly," David would have started, his voice steady but tense. No sign of an external breach. The SEC's data, it came from the system itself. He'd type a command, and the screen would fill with Seraphim's back-end code. My code. "It's flawless," he'd say, a hint of awe in his voice. Every trade Kian sent through the so-called omnibus channel was instantly mirrored to an encrypted vault. He'd point to a section of code, a masterpiece I'd crafted over weeks. The vault's key was tripartite, 3 parts, useless alone. One tied to the company's private key, another on a Zurich server. He'd pause, bracing himself. The third was linked to Dr. Shaw's employee ID. The silence would have been deafening, the horror dawning on their faces. Not a sudden jolt, but a slow, sickening realization. The story's climax wasn't a showdown between me and Kian. It was a confrontation between powerful men and the elegant, inescapable truth of their own catastrophic folly. David would have entered one final command, pulling up a log file. When HR revoked her credentials, he'd explain, voice barely above a whisper, the third key activated. The vault opened and sent everything to the SEC and FCA. He'd look at Marcus Thorne. She didn't just build a compliance tool. She built a trap for Kian, baited with his own ego. He wasn't hiding his trades. He was notarizing them for the regulators. In that moment, Marcus would have realized he hadn't just fired an employee. He'd detonated a grenade I'd placed in his star trader's hand months earlier. He'd been a willing pawn in his own firm's downfall. While they sat paralyzed in their glass cage, Kian faced his own public reckoning. I saw the images later. Kian Jennings, the self-proclaimed titan, led out in handcuffs. His costly suit rumpled, his alpha persona gone, replaced by the helpless confusion of a child who doesn't understand his punishment. I watched his world implode from the comfort of my home, and it was deeply, profoundly gratifying. A week later, my world had shifted. I sat in a new office, not a skyscraper, but a serene, sunlit room at a university research institute overlooking a park. I'd been offered a role as a senior fellow studying systemic risk in financial markets, the job I'd always dreamed of. No politics, no egos, no Kian Jennings, just the pure, quiet pursuit of knowledge. On my desk, beside my laptop, sat a newspaper with a stark headline: Valerius and company faces record fines after star trader's arrest. The article detailed the looming multi-billion-dollar penalties, the plummeting stock price, the charges against Kian, and the unprecedented internal protocol that led to his fall. They called Seraphim a digital whistleblower. They still didn't get it. It wasn't a whistleblower, it was a weapon, and it had struck its target with surgical accuracy. My victory wasn't about wealth or power. I didn't want to run the bank or see it raised, though I admit the latter was a satisfying bonus. My triumph was the quiet, profound joy of a perfectly executed experiment. I'd built a system on one hypothesis: Kian's unchecked arrogance would be his downfall. The system performed as designed. The results were confirmed. My work was done. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed Arthur Vance, chairman of Valerius' board, a man who hadn't spoken to me in over a year. I let it ring, then answered. His voice was a slick pool of desperation. "Evelyn," he began, false warmth barely hiding his panic. "A terrible situation. Kian fooled us all." I stayed silent, knowing this wasn't a courtesy call. "We need you," he said, cutting to the chase. "The board's approved an extraordinary package. Name your terms. Come back. Lead an independent oversight committee. Total autonomy. Rebuild compliance your way." I listened without interrupting as he pitched an offer of unimaginable wealth and power, a chance to rule the ruins. He thought he was offering what I craved. He didn't understand. He never would. When he finished, a hopeful silence lingered. I let it sit for a moment, letting his desperation sink in. Then I delivered my final verdict, calm and clear as a scientist stating an irrefutable fact. "Arthur," I said, "my work at your bank is finished. I ended the call, took a sip of my perfectly brewed tea, and picked up the last tiny gear. With a steady hand, I placed it into the antique music box's mechanism, closed the casing, and wound the key. For the first time in over a century, it played a clear, perfect melody.